This is Akashvani. In the program Money Talk, now we bring to you a discussion on success of finance track under India's G20 presidency. The participants are Jayanto Roy Chaudhary, economic analyst, and Anubha Rohatgi, anchor.
The G20 summit under India's presidency concluded on a successful note a few days ago with significant accomplishments in the finance track, which discusses economic issues of the world, including global economy, infrastructure, financial regulation, and financial inclusion. The track is led by finance ministers and governors of the central banks. To discuss more on the issue, I'm now joined by economic analyst Jayanto Roy Chaudhary. Mr. Roy Chaudhary, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Anubha.
Mr. Roy Chaudhary, one of the key achievements for India's G20 presidency that's been talked about is the success of the finance track. What are the major outcomes of the finance track?
Basically, the digital public infrastructure that we built over the years and which accentuated work on which accentuated was fast forwarded during the COVID period. We call it the digital public infrastructure or JAM, which is a combination of the Jan Aadhaar, the accounts that we open for people, as well as the Aadhaar program that we have, and of course, digital inclusion that we have worked on. This digital public infrastructure is now being talked about, and most of the finance ministers agreed that this is the kind of infrastructure that they need to create. So what did we do? We created digital wallets where money could be sent directly by the state in case of need, whether it is old age pension, disability pension, or even some kind of compensation, or any kind of money that is transferred by the state to the individual. So this would be created, and there would be also, it could be used for a number of other things, like the way we have used it to facilitate the vaccination, entire COVID vaccination program, etc. So this basically combines the digital ID of individual person, the interoperable payment system, and a digital credential ledger, which is kept centrally. So this that they have talked about, the United Nations Secretary General's Special Advocate has also talked about it, and the patron of the GAPPFI, that is Her Majesty Queen Maxima of Netherlands, has endorsed it. So they are talking about this system. Why? Because we have achieved a remarkable 80% financial inclusion rate using this system. So they are saying if India can do it with this system, then the developed world where financial inclusion and financial literacy is at a much higher level, it can be done at a very fast rate. Once that is done, then a lot of other cumbersome process of inclusion or financial inclusion, it can be shared and you can instead use this. So this is what people are looking around, the G20 countries are looking around. And once the G20 countries endorse it, then you can rest assured that many more in the world will certainly endorse it. Already certain countries, Brazil, Estonia, Peru, Singapore, they have similar kind of DPI models. So we are talking about something which has already become a movement. They feel that this can become a worldwide kind of a situation.
You just spoke about financial inclusion. Now, consensus was achieved on 10 of India's agenda items for the finance track, one of which was, of course, financial inclusion, but there were many other items also. How did India ensure this consensus? What were the factors that led to this?
There was a lot of course, backroom diplomacy which went into this. But frankly speaking, these are basic factors which most of these countries accepted was needed, whether it was in terms of financial inclusion, there were also a number of other track diplomacy efforts which were going on as far as resolving issues related to black money was concerned. So all these are diplomatic efforts, and of course, these are very hard-nosed, practical solutions which countries desire. These are not something which India alone was pushing for, but these were something which most of these countries realized they needed to do, which is why they have been accepted. Yes, of course, diplomatic efforts on our part as well as on the parts of several other key players in the G20 did count for it. But let's face it, that these are things which people realize that they need to do, which is why they went ahead with it.
Now, one of the items was the plans to strengthen the multi-development banks or MDBs, such as the World Bank. The G20 leaders' declaration included a commitment by global leaders to pursue reforms for better, bigger, and more effective MDBs. How significant is this in the context of the economic challenges that the world is facing today and other issues including climate change and debt restructuring?
Look, for a long time, we have been talking about reforming the global structure as far as multilateral banks are concerned, as far as the IMF, the World Bank is concerned. We have a certain percentage because we were one of the initial founders of these organizations. But obviously, we were not that big players at that time. India was just becoming independent at that point of time. So the Western countries' share of the global income was much more. At that time had won the Second World War, they had a much bigger role to play in forming these institutions and obviously in the shareholding of these institutions. We have been demanding a change in the pattern of ownership. Not only us, but also China has been doing so. In fact, China went a step further and they formed their own set of banks, of which we are also a member. So these multilateral banks came up as a kind of rival to the World Bank and the IMF. And instead of imposing the kind of conditionalities that the World Bank and the IMF were imposing, these banks were giving credit on different norms. So there was thought of two things. Why did these Western countries continue to seek to dominate these organizations? Because these are big funders of global development efforts. So they've thought that if they can continue to control them, these are levers of diplomacy which they can use for their own purposes. And we wanted to democratize those levers. So at long last, they have realized that there is another challenge, there is another elephant in the room, so to say, and that is China. So they are willing to listen to us now. If you have noticed, the wordings coming out of the US president and many other leaders, Western leaders who are members of the G20 as well as of the G7, it seems that change they are willing to endorse. Of course, we have to see what level of change, what percentage of change, how much they are willing to see. Even today, the head of the IMF is really decided by a handful of countries. We really have no say in it. So these are things, let's see what actually emerges. Yes, a consensus has emerged that there has to be change. Now, what kind of change is something which will be debated, it will be, bargained for. There'll be a lot of things which will go into that. But let's see, things are started moving.
The Indian presidency of G20 also laid the groundwork for a coordinated global policy and regulatory framework for crypto assets. Now, crypto assets and transactions involving these have been in focus for quite some time now. So what is the significance of this outcome?
Well, there is a need to regulate it because we have a number of cryptocurrencies, as you know, which is becoming like a stock market, or you can call it some kind of a plain Hindi fatta market. So satta market, this is going too far. So therefore, they have decided on digital currency should be allowed. RBI also has a paper on it that we can have a digital currency because now much of the transactions in the world are not in hard cash in the rupee notes or dollar notes that we generally carry in our wallet, but through the digital means. So in that case, if that is so, then why not have a digital currency altogether? And so they are working on a framework to, if you're going to have digital currencies all over the world, it should be exchanged. You should be able to exchange it. Banks should be able to do business transactions in it. They should be able to exchange. Supposing I do a digital currency transaction in dollars and then I want it to be given in yens in Japan. So that there should be some framework. There should be some rules and regulations for doing that. Just as we have for normal bank accounts, for normal transactions, business transactions. So the groundwork for those rules, the groundworks for the future of digital currencies, if and when they are issued by various countries, has been laid right now. Can't even call it really a groundwork. You can call it some kind of an initial framework. After that, there is a lot of work which has to go on into this, and only then you will be able to create a system of exchanges, a system of settlements. All that has to be worked out. The Basel system is there, which is for the normal traditional route. How it has to be expanded, what kind of technologies have to be brought in, all that has to be seen and worked upon and agreed upon. So a lot of work still remains. But yes, the initial agreement, the initial move towards digital currencies, which will be accepted worldwide, has been started.
Now, the G20 addressed the taxation issues through what is called the two-pillar solutions. And this is to do with international taxation. What exactly does that mean? And how important is it?
We have to have certain rules of taxation which are acceptable to all of us. Otherwise, there will be broad inconsistencies in the way any business or any transaction is taxed. There are, as you know, a lot of gray areas in business as well as in financial movements of money from one place to another. How do you tax a product which is sold in India but which is sold from America and through Netherlands, where the money received goes to the Antiguas. So all these are points which have to be covered in this kind of a movement of money, of products, and of intangible products for that matter, services. So all this has to be worked on, and that framework is what we are talking about here. And that is where we have there were certain rough areas, gray areas, so they have been thrashed out, and some kind of a regulatory body or some kind of a rules are now being worked out, which will be eventually implemented and followed.
At the very beginning of the discussion, you mentioned our own very success stories so far as financial inclusion is concerned. So did India's own success stories on economic front, be it the unified payment system, financial reforms in the banking sector and others, help it achieve the success that it did?
Yeah, obviously the DPI is certainly something which is a success story in India. The number of financial transactions, the number of no-frills accounts has gone up. The number of no-frill accounts actually has tripled from 2015 when it was about 147 or so million to 460 plus million, with women accounting for more than half of it. So these are success stories which obviously attracted the attention of all the G20 countries. The point is that for the South, this is a success story, which means that they can also come forward and do something similar. For the North, which is the developed countries, it means that if India can do it, which is a much more difficult place to implement this kind of a infrastructure, a digital physical infrastructure, then for them, it should be much more easier. And this success story of the DPI certainly did help us in getting them engaged with the system and getting them to agree that there should be similar digital infrastructure which can be there in all the G20 countries. If you have a similar infrastructure, obviously it means a lot of help for all of us who now the world is more and more globalized because of more intense trade, because of more travel, etc. So it helps everybody. So consequently, this example of ours, this success story of ours did go a long way in getting this part of the report at least accepted.
Now that consensus has been achieved on 10 of India's agenda items for the finance track, what is the road ahead for the deliverables achieved?
Well, that will happen under the next presidency. But yes, the road has been laid out, and slowly we see not only that digital physical infrastructure will be set up on a similar lines by other countries, but we will be talking to each other to see to it there is some place where these physical infrastructures can meet. So there can be seamless digital transfers, not just digital inclusion. We are not just talking about digital inclusion now. We are actually talking about digital inclusion. Just for an example, India and Bangladesh have now decided that they will have a rupee Taka card, which means that an Indian traveling to Bangladesh for tourism or for business, he doesn't have to buy dollars and then go to Bangladesh and change his dollars into takas. He just has to have a rupee card, which will become a Taka card in Bangladesh, and he can withdraw takas or buy things with that card. And same goes for Bangladeshis who come to India for tourism, to get themselves treated, etc., etc. So it's a people-to-people help which we are creating, which this infrastructure system will actually support and help these people to do it. In time, also, it will mean that these kind of physical infrastructures, once they are developed in all the G20 countries, it will create a seamless effort for anyone. It virtually makes digital inclusion a worldwide phenomena and not just a phenomena which has been till now been only limited to India.
Now, there is still a month and a half left for India's presidency. What more can India do before it hands over the presidency to Brazil?
Basically, they have already laid out the milestones which are needed to be, accomplished in the entire process. So those milestones, we will try to have to see to it that we keep our side of the milestone story, which means we achieve the targets which have been set. We also nudge or we try and encourage our partner countries within the G20 to also achieve the milestones that we have talked about, so that by the time Brazil takes over, we have already gone ahead on the map that we had set in the G20 meetings, and that map will then make it easier for Brazil to take it further and ultimately achieve the goals that were set for them, for all of us.
Thank you so much for talking to us, Mr. Roy Chaudhary.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on success of finance track under India's G20 presidency. The participants were Jayanto Roy Chaudhary, economic analyst, and Anubha Rohatgi, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR.
ये आकाशवाणी है। कार्यक्रम मंथन में प्रस्तुत है